attendee of our BI user group. He's also very prominent in the data space, often presents at many conferences and festivals, data fests and data conferences. So he's one to know and one to watch for his insights. So we're very happy to have you today. Thank you so much for joining us, and take it away.
Thank you. All right, welcome everyone. Just want to start with a typical use case that everybody who's used some of you who've used Power BI might have experienced, right? So team gets together, you need to plan a Power BI report, right? Cool, everything gets together, you build this Power BI report and you publish it. And the business is thrilled, right? Changes the world. There's a slight lag here. So, all right, so teams are incredibly impressed with your Power BI report, right? So every day the data arrives, 6 a.m., your model processes it, and before the day started, everybody can access the data. But over time, it starts taking a little bit longer, right? So it used to take an hour, then took an hour and a half, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, and it's getting slower and slower and slower, but your business day's already started. So everybody hangs around waiting for your reports, right? All right. And that starts you not very happy because eventually they start getting angry with you. So then some well-meaning IT person Googles something. And he says, well, actually, I've heard something called direct query. Makes things so much quicker because I no longer need to refresh the report. So you run that, and that makes things worse, right? Because all of a sudden, that report that used to render in about 30 seconds, 10 seconds, 5 seconds, whatever that was, now takes 2-3 minutes. Nobody's happy with a report that takes 2-3 minutes. So I was hoping those watermarks would be less obvious. Guess who's super cheap with his graphics sense? Anyway, so Microsoft realized that this was a problem, but there was very few solutions to this, right? Especially within the Power BI platform. So 3 years ago, all right, we got a new thing called Microsoft Fabric. Microsoft Fabric brought a whole bunch of new features. And one of the biggest ones that we think about when we're thinking about Power BI was this idea of Direct Lake, right? So Direct Lake really is this thing that you should be thinking about, but do we want to do it? Maybe not, right? So there's a whole bunch of caveats, and we're going to discuss those. As said, my name is Michael Johnson. I run a little company. I'm also a Microsoft Data Platform MVP. This was the slide that Microsoft released back then, right? So what this says is we've essentially got these two modes we spoke about very briefly. We'll go into them in a little bit more depth in a sec, but we have this import mode. Okay, and this import mode is the default experience that you have in Power BI, and it's the one that you should be going to. Even today, it should be your default, and it's the one you should stick to, right? Then we've got direct query, and direct query, what that really does is it turns all of those queries that the visuals would need. It turns those into something like a SQL statement, and then issues that to your SQL box. All right, and the problem with that is SQL is not built specifically for the kind of queries that Power BI generally does. We want to sum up all the things. We want to sum up all million, billion records. SQL does not like reading a billion rows off disk. Okay, it's a different type of technology. Vertipack works very differently, and we'll have a look at how Vertipack works in a sec, but it's optimized for doing these big, long aggregates, right? Where all we do is we just filter things out. Okay, so what they did is they really wanted to create this best of both worlds, and that's kind of what they called it, right? So they said that this is the new mode. It's called Direct Lake, and it is a Fabric-only feature, so you're not going to get it in Power BI. But I think the bit that we want to sort of think about is they called it perfect, right? Which is a very ambitious wording for a product, right? Because it does have some flaws to it, okay, and limitations. So we just really want to have a look at how all of that works. Rough agenda for today. We just want to have a look at how import compares to Direct Lake. So this is the underlying tech. We're not going to get too deep down. But at a high level, what is import doing? What is Direct doing? How do they work sort of differently? We're going to get introduced to this idea of framing, because framing replaces this thing that we call refresh. Okay. This is a quick show of hands. Who here is a Power BI developer? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What do you click? Leave if you click. This actually used to be a click user group way back in the day. So anyway, so we've got this idea of framing, and then we've got these Direct Lake guardrails, and these are some of the first limitations I spoke about. So it's not like I have a small Fabric capacity, I can do anything. Microsoft have created all of these limitations, which is fair enough to sort of make sure that you're not over using a capacity. And then we'll go through some of the items, some of the considerations where you would think about just choosing between the different modes. Because again, it shouldn't necessarily be your default mode just because Microsoft say it's perfect. Okay, so import versus direct lake. And really all of this does is come down to a semantic model. So a semantic model is that thing that Power BI sort of constructs in the background. So Power BI Desktop is a bit of an interesting thing because it's actually multiple things. There's three big engines in there, right? There's this ingestion engine, there's this calculation engine, and there's this visualization engine. So, it's got all of these things, but the one that we're interested in is this calculation or this modeling engine, right? So that's used as something that's called VertiPack. Okay, so VertiPack has this kind of process. VertiPack is the underlying tech to it. Anybody here, I'm talking about the old people, you might have called it tabular. I look at you, right?
That's not nice.
So anyway, so before we had Power BI, it was an analysis services product. It still is an analysis services product called a tabular. So you might hear it called VertiPack. Maybe it's the Power BI engine. These are all the same names for essentially the same thing, but it is the semantic model. That's the new name. Microsoft has given anything. Microsoft are not good at giving names because it is a semantic model, but it's very generic. There's you're going to see a lot of competing products have semantic models. It's not the same semantic model, right? Okay, so at the heart of it, definitely, okay. So at the heart of a VertiPack model, we've got this concept of a table, okay? So a table is just a logical container. It actually does nothing. The thing that matters are columns, okay? So VertiPack specifically is a column store a model, which means that data is not saved in rows. Instead, we save it in columns. That becomes very, very important with performance because remember I was saying that VertiPack is incredibly fast for some things that SQL is not. That's because SQL is row-based. So if I've got a table with 100 rows and I want to just add up the last one, SQL still has to read all of those other columns, even though they're not relevant to the query. Versus in VertiPack, I can consider only the columns that are important. So the world's simplest query is, I'll go and count the number of rows in this table. That kind of function can happen incredibly quickly because it just scans a single column. And VertiPack's actually kind of done. It's got various sort of components to it, but it's very, very fast, but very, very dumb. So it can sum things up and it can count things incredibly quickly, which is what we do in BI, right? Which makes it inappropriate for a machine learning analytics kind of model, but fantastic for kind of analytics that we do. So we've got a little table. A model is obviously useless with just a single table, so we end up with multiple tables. And then between those tables, we create relationships, right? So this is nothing particularly new on modeling, but this is what a semantic model looks like. But how do we get data in there, right? So because that's the bit that we're looking at, right? So in a semantic model, the first mode that we look at is import mode, and that is the mode that we use, by default, right? Okay. And it really begins looking like some sign-outs. We have a data source, okay, and then we have this table that we want to get data into. How do we do that?
Asking us?
Well, yeah. Power Query, right? Power Query is everybody's favorite self-service BI tool. It's a user-friendly Excel-like experience where I can connect to a table, I can join it, I can remove stuff, I can rename stuff, I can do all of these things in a very Excel-like fashion, okay? So that is this engine that gets invoked whenever we perform a refresh. Now that refresh can be refresh in the model, or when you push close and apply, with using Power BI, that's exactly it. It's invoking a refresh. So this refresh fires off Power Query. Power Query goes and connects to that data source. See, I told you they were awesome animations, right? Okay. I'm not in charge of the Power BI front ends, right? For a reason. Okay. So we've got this sort of Power Query. It goes and connects to that data. It goes and runs through whatever transformations you've defined, and then it lands it on the destination side. So that could look something like this. We're going to go and pull up a table. This could be a simple select star from table. It's going to sort of move it across. Power Query obviously supports something called query folding. Who knows what query folding is? What is query folding, Sven?
Sends one statement to the SQL box instead of multiple, but it aggregates the first few 3, 5, 10 until query folding breaks. It makes it quicker to bring the.
You are not incorrect. Okay, so 100%. So what it's trying to do is SQL is good at some things. So the worst thing I might do is, let's say I want to select everything from a table. And the first thing I did in Power Query was, well, now only go and select where the product is red. So I don't want to go and ingest all the products and then filter. It's actually, it knows specific engines are smart enough. So it can go build down all of those rules into a simplified SQL statement. So instead of saying select star from products, it'll say select star from products where product color is red, right? So that's what query folding does. But anyway, you get this query that gets issued against your data store. It goes through Power Query. It does these little transformations. My animations are so much slicker on the screen. It does whatever those transformations are. What those are don't matter in import because they can be complex, right? That's an important thing to consider. We then take them and we move them into that model and where they get loaded into that model. Okay, this is like 80s graphics, right? Okay, so that's essentially how import mode. So when you click and refresh, that's what happens. Now, what is the problem with import mode? What is the biggest challenge?
Also of that data in memory.
Is that a challenge?
Depends how much there is that.
So memory size can absolutely be a big thing.
Speed.
Huh?
Speed. How fast is it?
So this is the fastest mode, so it's not a problem.
You got to wait till the next refresh to get your next.
Freshness, data freshness, right? So if I'm refreshing my data once a day, I'm not seeing today's sales, right? So you often end up with these. Has anybody been asked to refresh the thing more often, right? And then you bring your whole system down because you're refreshing it every half hour, and it actually takes 45 minutes to refresh the model. And yeah, okay. So anyway, so those are some of the problems we have with. But import mode really is the fastest mode because it moves those columns in memory. That's where they stay. And in memory is where we're going to get the fastest query speed because it's never going to be, or reading something off disk or off a row-based structure is never going to be as fast. Yeah, so import mode is almost always going to be the best performing system. Okay. Another thing that's also worth considering, especially when we look at fancy laptops like this. Have you ever built a Power BI model on your desktop and it's really, really fast and then you publish it and it's slow? Because sometimes your PC is better than the servers that Microsoft are hosting these things on, right? So how we do things sometimes, especially if you get memory pressure, because import mode has, especially if you're on Power BI Pro, you've got memory constraints, right? You don't have memory constraints on that. Right. Again, so we've got this little table with data in it. If we need to then go and query it, so if I'm going to come bring on my favorite tool, Power BI, but I can obviously go and connect anything because it's the semantic model. It's not Power BI. I could use Power BI, Excel, any other visualization tool. I can connect to Tableau or whatever that is, or I can write queries with something like Tableau Editor or DAX Studio or whatever that tool. Against that, it's going to go and take that query, it's going to go and answer that, and it's going to bring it back. Okay, so that's the basics of import mode. Does anyone have any questions on that? I like questions, so don't feel shy if you. Yes, they're not from you though.
My question is about the definition of query folding. For example, the way I understood it is that query folding is literally how Power BI takes the scripts, the M script, and then transfer it to the script.
Yeah.
Is there a reason why, even if you're operating your process SQL Server, and you can keep on saying that model as you are transforming information and then say like, I don't know even how to fix it. Most of the time it does work. I don't know at what time it fixes. It used to break, for example, when MariaDB, depending on how they configure things, but when it comes to SQL Server, I still encounter, for example, that part of like whatever transformation you did.
Yes.
It doesn't do that. So how does one, for example, make sure that you are making the actually speak to the data source properly?
All right, so that has nothing to do with what we're speaking about, but I will answer it super quick. Essentially, it will try and fold as many of your statements. Remember, it starts at the first step.
They couldn't hear, so maybe you just want to summarize the question.
Okay, so the question is, at a high level, is when we're using query folding, it doesn't always fold all of the steps. It only folds some of them. And why does it only fold some of them? Is that a very loose version of what you've asked it. Okay, so it will try and fold all of those queries as much as it can. There are conditions in which it won't. Because, the most basic is that because the data it needs to be able to do that no longer exists. So if we're going to do something like an append, which is weird because appends that side, if we're going to append data from another source, I can't append the data that's coming from my Excel sheet into my database table because it doesn't know what those things are. So anything like that can't do it, as well as anything that can't be done in your data source for some reason, right? So SQL generally can do most, okay, but different flavors can only go so far, right? But it is a limitation on the data source. But it's because there's a step that cannot be done on that engine alone. Sometimes it's because your data sources, when you get to set your data sources to organizational or private, or that can have an effect. Because if you set it to private, you're specifically saying never ever mix data from here and here, right? So then it's not going to try and push data. So there's a lot of reasons query folding doesn't happen. Specifically, it's a step that can't be folded, and usually it's because that data, all the data it does need doesn't exist. Okay, so about 5 years ago, with the introduction of Power BI Premium, we got a new storage mode. We call this a large semantic model. This is probably an option some of you have seen. Anybody created a new workspace? And Power BI always asks you to choose a large model or a small model. And which one do you choose? Small. Why do you choose small? Because I'm trying to save space, right? No. Okay. So large semantic models actually was the first step to direct lake, right? Because it does some of what direct lake did. And when we had it, we took the model and we broke it up into two pieces. You had a memory, which is that main working memory that queries are there, but we also wrote part of it to disk. Okay. So what that meant is that if we were getting memory pressure on my instance, and memory pressure is only something that we really thought about in Premium, it said I need to do something to reduce memory. And when I've got a small model, I have two options. The whole model is in memory, or none of the model is memory, right? So what I wanted to do, or what large semantic models really try to do, is allow us to evict columns, because columns are what counts, not tables. So I want the ability to remove columns. So when I'm under pressure, I can evict certain columns. So awesome graphics, when we're under memory, we can evict those columns that aren't used because, that 80-20 rule really works in modeling as well. 80% of the reports use 20% of the columns in our model, right? So how often do we report by SKU size or product color or whatever those things, right? These are not useful things. Customer address. Everybody brings in customer address into their customer div. Who ever reports on anything on a customer address? No one, because somebody wants to go and write like a invoicing module or something against it. So that's why we brought it in. And it's the worst kind of data to bring into your model because it's big and it's unique. Okay. So anyway, so we've got this idea of a working memory, and then we've got this version that exists inside of cache, right? So that allowed us to, whenever a query came in that needed that missing column, we just brought it in, and life continued as usual. And what that meant, it was a little bit slower, okay, because it had to do that read-in, but generally that's very quick. So, so Vertipack uses a very specific compression algorithm. Okay, so you might have seen it. People using Fabric might have heard of something called V-order. Okay, it's a very specific way. It tries to make the data really, really small. That's what it prioritizes over all things, not to make it searchable, to make it small. Because Power BI's initial goal was to get everything in memory. It didn't try to make it optimal because the engine was fast. It didn't need to worry about that. Okay, all right. So obviously, you had this little option for large semantic models. You would have selected it. Happy days, right? Okay. So then along came Direct Lake and Fabric. And then how did that really change things? And why did the large semantic model why was that its predecessor? So if we think back to the image that we had a second ago, we have this model, this database. Okay. But what I want to do is I want to treat that database as my cache, right? My written version. But I can't do that if I can have any format, okay, and if the data is in the wrong structure. So this is where direct lake starts having a lot of limitations. How I want to consume the data is how it needs to be written in disk. There is no Power Query, right? That's why we discussed Power Query, because there is none anymore. You lose it. You can obviously use Power BI or Power Query to load the lake. You can't use it to go and do any transformations between what's in the lake and what's in the model. Yeah, so that is a very important consideration. You need to do all of your transformations up front. There's a fellow named Matthew Roche. He's got something called Roche's Maximum, where you want to try and perform all of your transformations as high upstream as possible. So if I can do that enrichment, don't do it in the Power BI model, do it in the semantic model. Don't do it in the semantic model if you can do it in the lake. Don't do it in the lake if you can do it at source, right? That's the idea, because then we get a lot more reuse, right? Okay, so there's governance reasons to not do that as well, but yeah. Okay, so we've got this solid here. Now it has to be a lake. It has to be something written in Delta. Now where I say lake is not necessarily true, because it can work against warehouse items as well. The warehouse and the lake both use the same underlying data structure. Does anybody know what that storage mechanism is called? Okay, false. Correct. Delta. And some people call it Delta Parquet. It's technically not called that, but yeah, that's fine. So Parquet is a storage format that also uses column store compression. Okay, so what we do is we're storing data in columns, and it allows us to compress data a lot. So when Microsoft first released its first column store compression, it called it Hackathon, right? Because we were going to get, was it Hackathon or was that then memory? Yeah, so we were going to get 100 times compression. Turns out we get more, about 12 to 15 times compression, okay, by just storing things as columns instead of rows. Again, there's a whole bunch of math, and but one of the biggest reasons for that is if we think about our columns, how often are our columns exactly the same? Okay, if I've got products, I end up with 5 different colors, right? So now all of a sudden I go and I create a key. So 1 is red, 2 is green, whatever those up, and then I can replace all that with that. So there's that type of encoding, a dictionary encoding, and then there's run length encoding, where I end up with the same value. So I have a fact sales table, and I have 1 million sales. All of a sudden I can just say, you know what, today is the 5th of June, and make the next 1 million rows the 5th of June. So all of a sudden I've compressed 1 million rows or cells into something that's about 8 bytes long. So that's where you get this fantastic compression from, right? Okay, anyway, so it uses this underlying Delta Parquet storage format, and it can read that data off exactly the way I described the large language model does. So again, the query must be fabric or warehouse. Okay, if we run a query, so I'm going to run a query that just says sum, the fact internet sales amount, and return that. So what can you tell me about that result right off the get-go? Only refers to a single column. Okay, that becomes really important. Okay, import mode, I have to reload the entire table. I can't refresh just a single column. I have to reload the entire table. And in Power BI, generally we reload. Right? You can refresh tables if you get a little bit deeper into it. But so I'm just going to scan the table, that single column. So the engine's going to go away. It's going to say, well, I've got this semantic model. Somebody's defined a semantic model for me. I need to populate it. I've got this query that's coming. It's only asking for that one column. So we're going to say, well, let's go and bring that one column. Let's go and shift it across. The graphics are so much better. The site, no, they're not. I'm pretending that crap. All right, okay. So we now bring that one column into memory, and then we can satisfy that query. Okay, and that's why it can be so much faster, because we bring only the data that's in there, and we bring it in when it's pre-compressed. Okay, so Power Query doesn't brings it in a CSV or a SQL table or whatever. That's a big row store. It needs to bring all the data. So this is incredibly efficient because I'm only bringing in that little bit of data. Now, obviously, if this is a big table, it could be slow. Okay, so that's where modeling techniques begin to matter, right? So how big is the data type? How unique is it? How many records are there? All right. So we now sort of bring that data in, and then I want to go. I've got a slightly different query. So what does this query do? Who knows their DAX? Huh? Come on, who's writing what, PL600, is it? PL300 is the DAX one? Or 600 has DAX in it, man?
A little bit.
Yeah. You can tell me what that does.
Create a table of the sales amount, with column of sales amount.
That's one thing that it does. But what does it do?
Unique values of color.
Yeah. So it goes and gets the colors and then tells you how much sales. So if you go and drag in Power BI, when you go and drag the product color in and then you go and drag the total sales, this is kind of the query that gets generated in the back end, right? Okay, so it goes and gets all the unique values. So now what's going to happen is I'm going to come into my model, think about my model. I've only got the one table in there, total sales amount, but I want to go and run this query. So I know I've got total sales, but I don't have this guy yet, right? Okay, so I need to now go back to my storage layer. I need to say, hey, I've got this, but I don't have product table or specifically the product column. That's what we call the cold cache. So we need it. It doesn't exist. Okay, it exists in the lake, not in memory. Okay, so the one that's in memory is called the hot cache. It is a cold cache. So it's going to say, well, please go and get me that column. It's going to go and fetch it. It's going to load it into memory. Drop it down. Yeah. All right. And then we can render that. Sort of, right. Okay. So that's essentially how able to build, directly. So, has anybody got queries? We're going to go into a demo. We're going to build a model. Okay. Show you how that's done. It's actually going to look very similar to what you've done in the past. Couple of differences, but yeah.
Just one question. So essentially by doing this, you're creating this. Probably you explained it earlier. Trying to understand by doing
I
this,
probably didn't describe it very well.
you're essentially creating a semantic model.
Yes. We're going to create a semantic model. That's exactly what we're going to do. And that's one of the big things is when we create GSC, we're just going to create a semantic model, okay? Not an attached report, right? Okay. And I'm going to come and my Teams is playing up, so let's go. Oh. See, I shut everything down. See, suspend some people, right? Some people. Okay. Yes, I'm going to open up Power BI quickly. Let me in. Okay, so here I have a very simple model. I've got a couple of things in there. What I've created a Gen2 data flow. So a Gen2 data flow is what?
N1 plus destination.
Nice. Okay, but it's Power Query, right? So Power Query used to only be available in Power BI. And I could only move data around within the Power BI model. It said, you go and create these rules, and I'm going to load it into memory, and that's all you can do from it. Microsoft realized, that's a fantastic standalone product all by itself. Okay, if I want to go and build data lakes and do all these manipulations, I can have this. All right, as long as it's not me again. Okay, so I can actually go and build these. We found you. Okay. Okay, so we want to go and load that data in. And I'm using a Gen2 data flow to get my data into a data lake. But it's not the only way to bring data into a data lake. What else can we do? Pipelines. So we can use pipelines, right? So that's like Azure Data Factory, right? So this is a copy job activity. It says, go and bring data from here to here. What else can I do? Mirroring. I can mirror data from another source system. I can do shortcuts. So I'm using Databricks. I would like to mirror my Databricks data in there. I can use Spark. I can use real-time analytics. I can use a lot of different tools to bring data into my model. So while I'm using Power Query here, please don't think that Power Query is the only thing that you can do this data with. In fact, when you use Power Query, all of a sudden this whole thing starts to look like a Power BI report, right? Because I would need to refresh the entire lake. Okay. Anyway, so I've got this little model, and I've got a lake. So a lake house. A lake house is, do you know the difference between a lake house and a warehouse side of Fabric? I see you nodding your head, so now you've got to answer the question.
Yeah, so lakehouse is unstructured files. Lakehouse and data warehouse is SQL. Yeah, sorry. So yes, the data warehouse is structured data inside the tables, and lakehouse is together connecting the SQL with unstructured data, structured and unstructured in file systems.
Yes, so the lakehouse supports more unstructured data. Everything doesn't, you can see we've got two sections here. We have this table section, and tables, if it's tables, it's a managed table, and it's Delta Lake in the back end, right? What is by default, okay? But I can also have this file section where that can contain anything, right? So I'm loading all sorts of bits of data. I can load that in there. A warehouse only is like very SQL-like. I need to create a table, and I need to copy data into the table. No storing anything, sort of outside of that, right? Okay, so I've got the system table. You can see I've created a couple of, you can see those products. And we're going to go and create our semantic model. Now, until about 6 months ago, the only way you would do that, or you could do it through the UI, through the Fabric UI, it's not great. Okay? Fabric UI wasn't great, so I would then reach out to a tool like Tabular Editor. Tabular Editor is it used to be an open source tool. It still is open source, but now there is a paid version that's a lot more powerful. Okay, it's a fantastic tool if you're going to do enterprise grade semantic models. Okay, it's built by the Europeans, so it is not. I think it's like, it's crazy, man. It's like $100 a month or something. Okay, but it's a fantastic tool. But Microsoft have now actually made it possible for us to do the modeling, direct link modeling within Power BI desktop itself. It's interesting. It basically just becomes a user interface into the service, okay? And you're going to see that now is when I go and create this mode, it's not going to ask me to save it. You know how every time you want to publish, it says, no, you've got to save first. None of that anymore, right? Okay, so we're going to come into Power BI, and I didn't open up Power BI. But, okay. Favorite tool. We're going to go and create a blank report. So nothing's in there, right? And this time, at this point, Power BI doesn't know what it's going to do. I want to bring in some data, okay? And I'm going to bring in data. Usually I go here to this little tab over here that says go and get data. I'm not going to do that because I don't want to invoke Power Query because this is Power Query window, right? It opens up that Power Query experience. Instead, we're going to come to the one lake catalog. And there's a couple of options. We're going to use the semantic model in a second, because the semantic model is the report. But we're going to go and connect directly to a lakehouse at first. So we're going to go and connect to it. I'm going to select my awesomely named lakehouse called My Lakehouse. And then I'm going to go and connect. But before I do that, I'm just going to point out two options here. You have two configuration types. Now, this has changed recently. Originally, you only had the SQL endpoint. Okay? And what that really meant is that when I needed to go and get any of the schema information, I could go and connect to the SQL endpoint to go and get what that thing looked like. But when I published it, it wouldn't go through the SQL endpoint. It would go against the Delta Lake, but it wouldn't always go to this. It wouldn't always go against the Lakehouse. What we had is we had these conditions that actually might force us to use the SQL endpoint, and we'll discuss what some of those are. But that is essentially when it goes against that SQL endpoint, it's what? Query turns into that big slow thing that we're trying to avoid. So you really, really wanted to be careful about using the SQL endpoint. So today, you would probably default into using one lake. Now, what this means is that if you do hit in some of these conditions, the report's just going to stop working. Maybe a report that doesn't work is better than a report that is slow. That might be contrary, okay? But people are going to get angry at you, but they're not going to tell you. But they are going to tell you if the report just doesn't work. And you're going to get a whole bunch of error logging. You're going to be made aware of it. You're not always going to be aware that this thing has fallen back to the SQL endpoint, right? Okay, so we're going to use this one lake connection. We're going to go and connect and ask us to choose our model. And because I'm a yeah,
I'm having a different, view. When I click on connect, I'm being directed directly to one lake. Reason why?
You might not have enabled, so what version of Power BI Desktop are you using? You might need to go and enable the preview feature. Okay, now if you're on the latest one, it's not preview anymore. So this went live, so it's no longer preview feature. But if you may be on the January edition or something, you probably have to just go and enable it, right? And remember, if you are 8 months ago, it didn't even exist. Yeah, so you just need to check your Power BI version for that. Okay, so here you can see we've got those tables. I'm going to go and choose to bring those tables in. Boom, boom. I'm going to click OK. And the experience is a little bit different from what we used to with the typical Power BI import model. You're going to see a couple of things are going to come and disappear, and just done that, evaluating. Of course.
You have to give it a name. Because I think I was trying to do this.
Power BI desktop, yes, and I'm going to tell you why in a second. Okay. So first thing is, I told you a couple of things we're going to change. Can you see in the top left-hand corner over there? Can you see how the ability to add visuals is gone? You know, we always have that. Now it's gone. To view the table, that tab is now gone as well. And the reason for that is I can't create visuals. I'm creating a semantic model. I'm not creating a Power BI report anymore. Okay? And the data doesn't exist in the semantic model. It exists in the lake. So you can't see the data there either. So all you're seeing is the high-level stuff, right? Okay, so what we can do is we can create tables. We can rename things. We can create measures. We can create relationships. We can do all of the semantic stuff that we're used to, but we can't create a test visual for it. We can't do all of those things. Now, what is interesting, and this comes back to your question about, usually Power BI doesn't ask you for a name up front. I can go and leave it as untitled, you know, for the first bit, and it's only before I want to, you know, publish that's the first time I think I have to actually go and give this thing a name. But this thing forces me to create a model because one of the things you're going to notice is it doesn't have a save button. Okay? I cannot save this Power BI report or this Power BI model. That's because it only exists in the cloud. So what's happened inside of my lakehouse, if I come back into my workspace, yeah, I'm going to quickly refresh. It didn't exist, you know, magician's tricks, right? We're going to refresh, and you'll see it's created. Oh, it jumped my mojo. Okay, there you go. We can see my model. It now exists there. So this thing that we're using desktop to modify that thing in the service. Okay, it can only work there. Okay, so there's no local development, because one of the best things about Power BI was always that you could, when you want to play, as long as you loaded the data, you could carry on developing a model. No more. Have to be connected. Okay, but the nice thing is every time I make a change, it's available immediately. So that publish option is gone. Careful, because if you are working in prod, delete things on the fly, right? So you want proper development disciplines when you start using these tools, right? Okay, so we've got this model. You can see I can actually go and open it up, and it's going to say open. And you can see that my model now looks exactly like what I have here. So I'm going to go and create so this is the AdventureWorks database, and I chose it, but it's actually a really, really bad dimensional model because it's not a dimensional model. It's not a star schema. It's what we call a snowflake, right? So I'm going to quickly go and create from my order details. I'm going to bring in the product ID. Go and grab a relation to the product ID, exactly like we get in Power BI. We're going to go and choose some of the properties of this relationship. Save. There. And I'm going to say, this is kind of how we like structuring our ideas. I can then also bring in my sales order ID. Go and bring in those two tables. And the reason I call this a snowflake, snowflake. Is what? What is a snowflake versus a star? How does it differ? So the snowflake.
As one main fact table.
It can have multiple fact tables. So a
set of dimensions for.
So the idea behind a dimensional model, specifically with a star schema, is that a dimension should only ever connect to a star. There should never be relationships between dimensional tables. But you can see here that in my order date, I have a relationship from my customer to my customer, right? That makes it not a star schema. From a Power BI context, that actually doesn't matter. Right? You just wanted to think about its modeling. But I just brought this in because this is the easiest one to get available. Okay, so if you install an Azure SQL database, it is you can when you go and configure it, you can actually say go and give me the sample AdventureWorks database. So it's the easiest for you to play with. Okay. Now where it would break that idea is what we would typically do inside of something like Power BI is we would say, hey, we need to bring that customer ID into the detail level, right? Can't do that anymore. Okay. So what it forces us to do is all of those housekeeping that Power Query allowed us to massage, we now need to go and fix right in the warehouse. So it puts greater upfront burden on the developers, which is a good thing. From an enterprise perspective, it is absolutely the correct thing. Now, one of the other limitations I'm going to tell you about just now is that calculated columns are not supported. Now, that has changed very recently, but I'll tell you what, I've got a little option in my settings that allows me to turn it on, but it still doesn't work. And I don't think they should allow it anyway. But Microsoft were very pleased with themselves. They had a blog, you asked and we did. See, because the problem is, right, is a calculated column is this non-persistent thing. So you remember that caching scenario we told. How does that happen? And this is an answer I don't know I don't have the answer to. Because does that mean that I need to recalculate that thing every time the table changes? And if that's the case, well, that's starting to sound a lot like import mode, right? So, okay, so I've created this model. And the nice thing is if I go and flip back to my little report over here, I'm just going to go and refresh, you're going to see that those changes are there. I never clicked a save. I never clicked a publish. I never did a thing. It's all there. Okay, so we're going to go and do a little bit of other things. Let's go and back to my model. I'm going to go and create the world's worst measure. I'm going to go and say total sales quantity, right? Quantity, and how do I calculate the total sales quantity? Of order quantity. Okay, so I've gone and created that report. If I flip back into the model again, I should see it. That's not a refresh option. I'm just going to refresh the entire window. Okay, so do I see my total sales? There it is, right? Okay, that's how you know what I did it, because it has grammatical errors in it, right? Okay, so you can see that this is all live, right? There's no publishing and there's no saving because everything only exists in the service. Okay. Now, one of the tools that you should, we mentioned it, is Tabular Editor. What Tabular Editors are going to allow you to do is actually create that as a savable item. Now, that used to be what we called BISM, okay, which is a very ugly version of JSON. One of the other things that we got when Fabric was released was a new format, which is a YAML kind of configuration for the model, which is so much easier to read. But most importantly, we can put it in source control. Now, I know the small little one-man shows like myself don't worry too much about source controls, but if you're working in a bank, insurance company, in a big software company, source control is a must, right? And that's going to make the kind of process. So I think there's still a lot of reason to look at Tabular Editor. If you're in a big corporate, go and check it out, right? And hopefully they'll give me permission. I need to speak to them, but you see.
Can only 3 do it, or can 2 do it?
Huh?
Tabular Editor 2 do it? Because obviously that's the free one.
It can. Yeah, I think it can. It can't do something, I know. Yeah, okay, anyway. All right. Oh, you know what it can do? It can't work with models in the service. That's what it can't do. So it can work with the Power BI desktop, which is fine, but not for this at all, right? Okay. So you've got any questions on what you've seen here? So you see it looks fairly similar, okay? But I can't do some of the things that I want to be able to do, right? I want to add a new column. I want to add a new table. All of these things are not possible right now, okay? Because they all need to be persisted. So as an example, I've got what is missing. What is the most important dimension? Calendar table. All right. I call it a date table, but spot on. So if we want to go and create that, I need to go and do something to go and write an item. So here I've got a very simple little Spark job. So we spoke about different ways of getting data. Spark is obviously one of those. I'm going to go and create a little Spark table. Just going to go and run that. Takes all of about 20 seconds to run. So you can, everybody know PySpark? Learning it? Are you loving it? Different beast, isn't it? So the nice thing is within Spark, you can use Spark SQL if that's what you're used to. It can do most of the things that you need to do. Obviously, learning PySpark is quite useful because then you get a lot of the programmatic controls. So then you can do a lot of metadata-driven sort of processes that you can't do in SQL.
So Michael, there's a question here in the chat from Tian just saying, if you update the model on the server side, does it automatically update the desktop or not?
It does.
There we go.
All right. Wants to. So what are we doing? Create another. It's my fields. Semantic models. It doesn't give me a. It's not allowing me to add a. No good
It
reason.
shows viewing at the top. I don't know if that is doing
Oh, yeah,
anything.
you got to view top right, edit.
Okay. See some people, man. Huh?
Yeah, I know it's Tian's though.
Tiana, we'll give Tiana a fist bump there. Huh? It's reading the documentation. It's always the most difficult bit, right?
Yeah. Doing a live demo, it's got to get tripped up
All
somewhere.
right, so we're going to go and add a new measure. Very fancy measure, that one.
I'm starting to warm up to editing in the service. Warming up to editing.
It's certainly a lot more convenient.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's
got version control now, version history, I should say. So that's better because that was what put me off before. And it's not as slow anymore.
So there absolutely are reasons that you can do, but if we come back in here and sales order detail, my new measure, refresh on there. The refresh when you're in something like a direct lake or you're using a live connection just updates the semantic model. Is it okay? Huh? So that's the end of our presentation. Okay. So we're not saying it's without bugs. We like living on the wild side. All right, we need to speed up. Huh? Okay. All right.
How many more slides? We haven't seen all your animations.
As many slides as we got. Okay, so anyway, so we're going and created a model. You guys are happy. Totally believe me that everything is cool. So we got this idea of framing, right? So we've gotten. Let me just come back to questions because I've just realized I do speak too much. I know this. I know this. Okay, so framing becomes really, really important because how do we bring in data? Because one of the ideas behind it is that the data should always be available immediately. Now, in a typical data warehousing scenario, that might not be a problem because I'm refreshing the data warehouse once a day, once an hour. But when you think about a real-time streaming system, writing events every second. Okay. Now, if I need to purge everything out of cache every second, what's the point in having cache, right? So that's going to be. So this is where framing comes in. So framing is what replaces a refresh. And really what that says is that we can go and take versions of our Delta table and we can query that. So just to understand how Delta works, okay, it uses Parquet tables. We spoke about the Vertipack, but it uses something called a Delta log. A Delta log is like a version, right? So every time we append data, we add a new Parquet table, but then we also modify this Delta log to say, hey, go and remove this from the chain and add this one, right? It's a fantastic, interesting process. Go and research it. We won't speak about it now, but this Delta log has version numbers. So we end up with a whole bunch of Parquet files, but we really end up with this thing, all right? So this is the log, and this is a very simple one, but you can see it's going 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So what we can do is Direct Lake can actually say, you know what, I'm using version 6. So even if you get a more recent version, always refer to version 6, and that's like a version of the table. So even if we're inserting frequently, okay, we don't necessarily have to refer to it. And that is done in the service, okay? So when you come into our Power BI model, I come into here, because you're going to see that in our semantic model, we still have option for refresh, right? Now, how can we have an option for refresh if refreshes aren't a thing? Okay, so it's a little bit different. So the first thing you're going to see that it says keep your data, your direct lake data up to date. Okay, and what this is going to do is it's created a little file system watcher on that table, and it says every time a new version gets created, notify the semantic model, and then it'll then go and update to its latest version, right? And that happens automatically, but that might be problematic, as I said, because it starts evicting the columns too quickly. So what you can do is you can turn that feature off, okay? And then we can say, actually, I want you to do it every 5 minutes, 10 minutes. It's less burdensome than a refresh because it's not refreshing. It's just saying only consider new data that arrives on this frequency, right? But if your data lake is only loading once a day, it doesn't even matter, right? Okay, so this idea of framing replaces that idea. It's not nearly as difficult, and it's all quick. It's all metadata. So there's not those big, long waiting windows. It's just saying, go and consider all the newest files as opposed from what you were looking at. Okay. We showed you that. We did the demos. Okay. So we're going to have a look at sort of these idea of guardrails. I spoke about, especially when we came to that SQL endpoint. What are these guardrails that Microsoft have introduced? And really, that was a way to stop you from abusing the capacity. Okay. I have some challenges with the way they've done these guardrails. I think some of them are a little bit ridiculous, and I'll walk you through my use case, for example. But we've got these high-level. So this is just straight out of Microsoft's documentation. So you can see it speaks about the two items. It speaks about the OneLake version and the SQL endpoint. And then it looks at important direct query. Right. So we'll have a look at the ones that are really important between these two modes. Okay. Won't look at the tenant setting one because this tenant setting also doesn't exist in my tenant settings, right? Okay, but they did go live with this feature a couple of days ago, so they clearly just haven't updated. But you no longer need to opt into this feature. It is now in GA, right? Okay. Obviously, it requires Fabric. It's only going to work in Fabric. Data sources, obviously, there is a limited amount of data sources. OneLake will support more. So when the real-time streaming stuff starts coming in, we're going to be able to attach to that stuff too. It doesn't exist today. It's still only the two, but you will be able to do more. Okay. Connect to the endpoint. Obviously, the endpoint doesn't exist in this mode. Okay. But what it starts doing is doing things like composite models, right? So the old limitation on the SQL endpoint is everything had to be in the same lake. Now, there was a bit of a hack because we could always use shortcuts. So even if it was in a different lake somewhere else, I could have shortcutted it in there. But we always had to have everything existing. Now I can actually bring in data from all over the show without that shortcutting problem. I mean, that's a semantic problem, okay? But it is nice to know that that's there. Calculated columns. Now, you're going to see it says that we can bring them in, okay? But as I experienced, it actually isn't working just yet. All right, so we can't show you that. Otherwise, the two modes are fairly similar, but it's always, it's always useful to sort of consider all of those items. But I think the ones that are going to matter the most, right, is the calculated columns, calculated tables. Okay, those don't really exist inside of Lake. Yes, I know they're saying they exist right now. And then row level security. Okay, so now this is from the SQL endpoint, okay, because one of the promises that OneLake gave us is one security model. The one security model is not here yet, right? It's there in pieces, and it also just went GA, yeah, which is something that's now going to work. But so you can actually now start using a data lake, security mechanisms to protect your data, which wasn't there before. It was a bit of an all or nothing. You're always able to do that security through the SQL endpoint, but the problem with the SQL endpoint is that said, if you want to use SQL to protect your data, I need to be using the SQL endpoint, which meant using direct query and slow, right? Okay. Another important thing to just remember is date-time relationships. Really, it doesn't support that. It's kind of weird, but it doesn't like the floating point points. It wants integers. So try it. Dates are fine in integer format. Okay. So there are ways around it. Now, these are the guardrails I spoke about. So if you are on different sizes, it's going to determine if it's going to fall over or not. And what this really means is you can see that I have a table here at, say, 300 million records. If I've got a little F2, if I go 301 million rows, it's not going to allow me to use direct lake anymore, and it's going to fall back to direct query automatically. Okay. Now, I think there's a big difference between an F2 and an F32, right? But my example is I've got a client, they are an online mobile payments transaction, so they make a lot of transactions, but they're actually not very complicated. The table is very narrow. So yes, I've got 1 billion transactions, but that fits in less than a gig of data. So I can actually do an import just fine, but they won't allow me to run it there because they're saying, well, it's row counts, but not all rows are equal, right? So I find that argument to be a little bit arbitrary, so that'll be my gripe with it. But these are obviously things that you need to understand, right? Now, if you are using the new mode, the lakehouse, one lake mode, and you exceed these things, it's just not going to work. Versus the SQL point is going to fail over, and it's going to be slow. So that's the consideration you need to make when you choose SQL or one lake, right? Okay. Yeah, so we'll. I wanted to do a little bit of a demo. We'll wrap up, and then I'm going to. I'd like to show you this. Okay. So what we've got is we've now gone and published that model, right? And I'm going to use DAX Studio to go and grab the connection string. Anybody know where to find the connection string on a semantic model? Server settings. All right. So that's your connection string if you want to connect to it from something else. Okay. So I'm going to use DAX Studio. Starts. Some people, huh? Judge, huh?
Well, you started 5 minutes late because of the intro.
I did start 5 minutes late. I'm totally going to blame you guys. Okay, so I'm using DAX Studio. Now, DAX Studio is a tool that you can use to query your data, but the important thing is you can also use it to query the metadata. So I'm just going to go and log in because everybody loves authenticating multiple times per day. There's that little button there that says, remember me, and it never works. And Microsoft lie. Okay, so I'm going to go and connect to this. I should have, because I didn't save my query. He likes watching people type live, so have that query. Okay, so okay, so I've got these tables now. I can use this to go and issue DAX queries, but I actually want to go and query the metadata. So I'm going to go and run this query. So it goes and runs a background little DMV against this column segment table. If I run it, it's going to bring back all of the metadata, right, of this table. But most importantly, give me, this is a UI. That is clearly not the, okay, there we go. So you can see that we've got this idea of temperature, right? So temperature is this idea of how does Direct Lake manage those columns. Remember I said that when there's memory pressure, it's going to evict columns. So it uses this idea of temperature. So every time you query a table, what it does is it adds some value to this column. And then it's continuously refreshing. Now, if you just go and say it's 4.557, that'll have gone down by a bit, 4.428, right? So you can see it just continuously goes down. So every time you hit a table, that number goes up. So what this essentially does is any table that's not really being used gets a very low number, and that's what it's going to evict. So when it hits 0, it's going to evict it. But if you get other types of memory pressure, it's going to push those guys out. So if we wanted to kind of test that, I'm going to, if I get and open up with Power BI, choose Power BI, or we're going to go and connect to that semantic model. Okay. Everything's super fast. So fast. We're going to go and connect to a semantic model. We're going to go and do that little query we ran a second ago. My model, connect. No options on that connect, so don't worry about that. And we're going to go and create a super fancy report. Product, color, by sales order detail. This is not a useful measure because it wouldn't, remember it's where sales measure is just equal to 1. It wouldn't actually hit my model. So I need to actually add a proper little report. If we come back to DAX Studio, we run that query, see that those two tables have now had a bump, right? Okay, so that's how it essentially manages those tables. Now, there's a little bit of, some people are getting really clever. They know that they want this column to be fast, so then they're writing little bits of automated code to go and query a specific set of columns. Now, if that's really what you do, again, maybe you should be an import, right? Because import's not going to be evicting columns like that. If nobody's using your report and it's getting flushed out of memory, that means that you have a problem with how you are building reports in your business, not a semantic model problem, right? So, but maybe, the CEO logs in at exactly 8:01 and he gets that report and you want to make sure it's just right for him. Maybe that's something that you would do there, right? Okay, so you can see that's how Direct Lake sort of manages which columns it's going to evict, all right? Yeah, so let's go back to our slide, do a little bit of a wrap up. Okay, you're going to see that Power BI by itself, even in their documentation, say Direct Lake might not be the correct choice for you. I'm going to leave you with that guidance of, if you don't know, use import. Import is still the most flexible, easiest to use, right? Okay, because you're going to get frustrated when you start using it, and every time you want to do something, I just want to add a space between the name. I want to add a surname hyphen last name, whatever. And all of a sudden now I need to go all the way back to data engineering to do that instead of fiddling with Power Query, right? So it's going to make it harder for you, especially in that prototyping phase, right? Again, some pros and cons, right? So the nice thing is model size doesn't really matter. We can start bringing in really, really large data sets. You saw the guardrails there, right? So remember the guardrails, but Power BI import on Pro has a 1 gig size. We're still talking about hundreds of gigs, terabytes that we can support in this mode, right? Queries are faster in import, okay, because they are always in memory, okay? I don't have to worry about, is this hot cache, low cache, right? It's always in memory, and it's being V-ordered, not using something else. So its sorting can be a lot more efficient. Now you can order, and you'll actually see there's a maintenance task that allows you to V-order. But remember, V-order is built specifically for Power BI. So if you're going to go and run a whole bunch of other stuff, all your data science workloads and those kind of queries are going to go bad, right? Databricks has better clustering algorithms for that, right? So it has what was called Z-order, but that's been replaced by something called liquid clustering, right? And those are better for general data engineering queries. Okay, refreshes appear faster. I say they appear faster because the data appears there. Now, if I'm running some big operation, some big Power Query thing, that still takes time, right? But depending on how you're doing your data engineering, I might be doing merges of data continuously throughout the day. If I'm just appending transactions, and that's fantastic. I'm not doing a full refresh. So it may appear faster, but if you still have that very big, we refresh once a day kind of opinion, truncate and load, it's not really going to change your world. Again, if that's what you're doing, important, right? Pre-caching, maybe we spoke about that pre-caching idea. Sort of analyze data changes in near real time. Again, those changes, depending on how you set that framing idea, is how quickly those reports, data bits can view. And then obviously Direct Lake has all of those limitations that import does not. Obviously it has some opportunities that import doesn't have either. So you really want to consider, if you are, like most reports are small, fresh once a day, Direct Lake might still worth checking out. Cool. Obviously, there were lots of questions. I'm more than happy to hang around and answer all of them. I don't know if you just need to wrap up with the online people or...
So I think let's maybe give it 2 minutes for some questions in, we'll take maybe one in here and one online, and then we can maybe post some additional questions in the chat, or have those who want to stay afterwards can ask Michael some questions in person. But are there any questions online? Let's go quickly to you.
Exceeded its recommended capacity.
Doesn't look like anything online. Okay, then what we might do then is wrap up so that we can ask any additional questions for those who are in person outside over some pizzas. But just before we do that, I think a huge round of applause to Michael for this amazing. And I'll say it's been really nice to actually see such a practical demonstration of how this is actually working and how it can be used and the limitations and pros and cons between both options.
And the awesome graphics.
And the fantastically awesome graphics. But yeah, thank you so much for the time and for coming out. And yeah, it was really informative. I'm sure everyone else agrees, that is in the room and online. So thank you for your time. Yeah, and then just to close out for everyone online and in the room, thank you so much for attending, and for those online as well, and for those of you all here for coming in. It's lovely to see you in person. I will hand over to Sven just in a second, but just to note, the next event will be happening on the 23rd of April. It is a Thursday. It's 1 week early. So just note that will be online. And that's just because of all those public holidays towards the end of the month. We're just trying to do it a little bit earlier so that everyone can attend. Perfect. Sven?
All right, thank you again. I have a quick announcement. Microsoft has sponsored 3 vouchers for the fabric exams. So that would be the DP600 or the DP700. Okay, so online people or in-person people, you all have the same chance of winning the vouchers. There's 3 of them, but there are 2 conditions. Okay, the one condition is you have to, if you win, so if you want to be eligible, you have to use the survey. Okay, either online people or in-house people, fill in the survey, and at the bottom where it says, do you want to volunteer or whatever, just put your email address in there and say, I would like to be eligible for the prize. Okay, I will do the prize at noon tomorrow. So if you haven't done the survey by noon tomorrow, too late. Okay, but the 2 requirements, please, is you have to exercise the voucher by the end of March to book your exam date by next week Tuesday. So you've got to book it by then, and then you must write it by the end of April. Okay, so if you're not ready, don't make yourself eligible for it if you don't think you're going to do it in April. Okay, because then you take someone else's chance of winning. If you were keen to do the fabric exam, okay, DP600, DP700, and you thought it would be quite nice to get a free exam voucher and do it in April, then do the survey, and then you've got 3 tickets to win, up to 1 in 3 odds. Those are bad odds. X number out of 3 is what I meant to say. Okay, so do you still have it, or?
I'm trying to share,
Okay.
but for some reason it's not, so I've posted it in the chat.
Oh, nice.
But for those who are in the office, I'll just put it on my laptop so you can come and use the QR code, but I have popped it in the chat for everyone else.
And then because Kaylin is from Intellect, she's not going to say thank you to Intellect, so I will say thank you to Intellect for hosting and for the pizzas. Okay, right. Thank you.
Awesome. And also thank you to Cedo Analytics and Sven for all his help as well. He also is always involved in all these things too. So it's not just an intellect side of things. We just help with pizza. All right. But thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day. Yeah, I will put that up. Oh, there we go. Now my screen is sharing. Or is it? I don't know. It says it is. I'll try and get to that, and hopefully it'll pop up soon. But either which way, thank you so much. Have a lovely Thursday and weekend ahead, and we'll see you online in April. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And your capacity.
Goodbye.
Oh, yes.
Yes, absolutely.
We don't have money for
Yeah.
running capacities.
Yeah.